I'm Silver.
Hi, I'm Dan.
And this session is essentially just to kind of give a bit more of an overview as to what foundation actually is. Because from what I've heard, your year kind of knows a bit about scores and not much else. Which, to be fair, was me last year at this point. I think I knew something called Oriel and not what it was or what it did. So hopefully this will just give you a good general overview of foundation. It's split into two parts though, this session. So this is the first part, which will take you up to kind of around your SJT-ish time. And then the second session will kind of go over a bit more of that, but I'll explain as to why that's happened so far. So just a general overview of what foundation actually is in terms of practicality. So when you go into your foundation, it's 2 years, and each year is composed of 3 4-month postings. So in your F1 year, you'll have 3, 1 in medical specialty, 1 in surgical, and then 1 wild card, which can be just about anything. And then in year 2, that's a lot more generic. It could be for anything. But usually you need to have at least 1 GP, 1 psych, or 1 public health. And people seem to think that like everyone has to do a GP at some point, and that's not the case at all. So my foundation, I haven't got any GP or psych. My one is public health. So you can pick them based on your rotations how you'd like. Dan, feel free to jump in at any point as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've made the broadcast sound incredibly exciting. I quite like that. So one of the key differences, which I didn't actually realise, and it's a slight tangent between the F1 and F2, is when you graduate, you get your pre-registration, and it doesn't become formalised until the end of F1. So you get kind of a pre-registration with the GMC, and that's what makes the difference between the two of them. So you're kind of in a probation period for your first year just to make sure you don't do anything incredibly bad. That would mean you're not good enough to be a doctor, but that's very rare. And it's when you're kind of in your F2 that you're very kind of considered safe in the career, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm going to take silence positively.
Yeah. Oh, actually, Dan.
That's my name.
Whilst you're looking, could you keep an eye on the chat? Because I just realised I can't see anything apart from my own screen now. Just in case.
Can try.
So, like, you can just pop up and unmute if you have a question, but also if you prefer to put it in the chat, you can do that as well. And maybe Dan will be able to see it. If not,
I might pick it up
at certain points.
If you've written in the chat and I clearly haven't noticed, just do like a really loud cough if you don't want to speak, and then I'll definitely double check the chat.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, and Dan's point is important because when you start hearing about locum shifts and things, you're not actually allowed to locum really until you're in F2. So that's just important to note. In this session, then, there's like a massive timeline of things that go ahead. So you begin with like your registration for foundation, you pick your actual program, and then you pick the main deaneries. And then after that, you have to then pick your individual rotations, get your references sorted, and sort out all the rest of it. So we're going to focus on that first chunk in this session. And we'll come into, the general overview soon. And then eventually you'll become an F1 doctor. So the foundation program, though, is important to know because some of these are reasonably new. 2 of them only came out last year. So you might not know all about them. But just as a general overview, standard foundation is the one that like just everyone can do. It's your classic go into hospital for those 2 years in 4-month blocks, doing whatever. AFP, which I've heard a lot of people from your year saying we could never do that, we can't get in. I don't like hearing that because I think everyone really at Warwick would be able to do AFP if they really wanted to. And it's a really cool thing to think about. It can be done in research, leadership or management or medical education. And it's just like a standard foundation with a few extra opportunities and interests in part as well. both me and Dan are AFP people, which is also why we're focusing on part 1, because if you're doing an AFP, that's the only bit you have to do. You don't have to do the second part. But if you're doing a standard, then you'd have to do that second part as well.
I will also add that in addition to being an AFP, I am one of the AFPs who thought there was no way that I would be an AFP and was encouragingly bullied into actually submitting the application for something I thought was pointless. So in terms of the people who are thinking that's not something I'll be able to do, it definitely could be. Yeah. With some encouraging bullying.
And we'll be happy to oblige in the bullying if necessary.
We've got a lot of practice.
So that's academic. There's 2 other special ones that have popped up as well. There's the psychiatry kind of foundation fellowship, which I think only came out last year or the year before. Yeah. And it's not like, oh, if you're desperate to be a psychiatrist, you have to do this one. If you are interested in being a psychiatrist, I think it is really useful. But also just if you're interested in psychology, it's quite useful as well. And in the next slide, we'll go into a bit more detail as to what it actually entails. But essentially, it's just having a bit more of a psychology type aspect to your foundation and like being linked with the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And then the last one is the Priority Programme, Foundation Priority Programme. And essentially, it's the foundation for places which don't normally get enough recruits. And so they just incentivize for students to come there with some pretty decent incentives, actually. And it can kind of be a mashup of the other foundation programs in itself, but it's just because in a less attractive area. Anything to add that I may have missed there?
I think you've actually covered it all fairly succinctly. I think like in terms of the benefits for the foundation priority, it's kind of got a little bit of something for everyone. So if somebody wants like a cash bonus, they do those sometimes. And then if you kind of would rather have a better rotation, they can also cater to that.
So yeah, just because I knew that when I was doing this whole foundation thing last year, I had no idea what these 2 really were. They just kept being bandied about. And you are going to hear a lot of FPs and PFs and FPPs and through the year. So it's just good to know what they stand for and which one is. So for psychiatry, you do get quite a lot of pros to it. Particularly for if you're interested in that specialty. So you get a free entrance to some conferences. You do get general subscriptions. They do this mentorship kind of thing with like actual current doctors to give you some extra support. And you get to meet with senior members of the Royal Colleges, which contacts can be actually really useful in someone's foundation career. Whatever foundation you're doing, I think it's always a good idea to kind of network and gain as many contacts as you can, because you never know when you might need them or when you might be able to work together. And also medicine is still a very much a who you know type sector, whilst it is trying to change. And you do get CPD subscriptions as well in modules. CPDs are it's like a professional development point system, which everyone needs to kind of do in their foundation, and it's just like doing extra modules, doing extra projects, and they all add up in points. And so it's just some of those things that you just kind of have to get done, so it's useful if you have extra modules and things. But the cons for it is that it's a bit more like the AFP in the sense that when you're applying, you have to do some extra things for it. So you do have to provide like an academic CV, which is kind of like a portfolio type thing, and there is an interview, which seems a bit more than the AFP one, because it's apparently can be like a 40-minute interview in front of a panel of doctors. Doesn't mean it's impossible or anything, but it is just a bit more of one of the more competitive, I think, areas for a very specific group of people. In terms of foundation priority, that's like we said, the standard with some extra things. So they do have like 3-year foundation programs, which doesn't mean you have to take an F3. So people will have F1 and F2, and then people can take an F3 where they don't get into the next stage of their training and they just stay as a foundation doctor for an extra year. But if you wanted to do a part-time foundation, FPPs allow people to do that. So if you have childcare and things like that, you can just have a part-time foundation. They also can give financial incentives. So like I've heard everyone's giving like £3,000 just for doing the foundation program, which is pretty decent. You can also have aspects of the AFP in it. You can get teaching diplomas and teaching certificates and things like that. And you can have training overseas. There was this one FPP in West Mids that seemed to be really interesting because they gave like a portion of time in Australia. But it's good to also be aware of what they're offering, because that Australia one was like in the sticks of like somewhere in the middle of nowhere, which people didn't realise until very last minute. So I don't know, it's not going to be like jumping into Sydney, but if you just want to get out, then that's a really good one. So, you know, but the cons are that these are in places which aren't usually typically attractive. So you're not going to have them at the London deaneries or anything like that. In fact, there's only 12 units of application, which I'll come on to describe as to what that actually means, but basically areas in the country that have them. So it is important to kind of think, if you are someone who's like wants to be near home and home is like somewhere less touristy, that might be a really good option for you. But yeah.
So one of the other things with these is to remember that you don't just have to apply to one of them. So you don't just pick kind of the FPP or the AFP or the FP and go, right, I'm going to apply to that one and leave the rest. So everybody has to apply to the standard foundation program. And then you are able to apply to the FPP, so the foundation priority program on top of that. And in addition to that, you can apply to 2 academic foundation programs as well. So you could do 4 applications all at once, which would be a lot of work, and I'm not sure why you'd want to. But you can kind of put different feelers out there depending on what you want to do. And you do have an advantage with the foundation priority and the AFP that you find out slightly earlier whether you've got a place or not.
Sorry that I keep changing the slides quite haphazardly. I keep forgetting I'm on my tablet, so poking the screen makes it move, so sorry. So yeah. So this is the general timeline for this kind of first part of your foundation application. So it all starts in summer. So in the kind of next month or so, behind the scenes is when stuff's going to start going on. So in June, the deaneries and the med schools are all getting sorted and trying to work out what rotations they're going to create and make. And in August is when the AFP programs start to become visible. That's about a month before the standard foundations and all the other ones kind of come about as well. So you get to just look and see where you might want to go. Then in September, you have your registration. So the med school actually enrolls you by themselves into the foundation kind of application process. But then you still have to register yourself into actually like getting onto Oriel, which is the system that we'll come on to later again, that you do all this through. And then in October, you can make your first set of choices. And I say first set because essentially there's like a deadline for you just to have been like active on your application. So you have your all of your kind of units of application, which essentially the deaneries, and you don't have to pick any rotations or anything. You just order the area of the UK essentially that you would want to be in from top to bottom. And you have actually quite a long time before you have to like solidify those choices. But in October, you have to make sure that you've at least ordered them in some form, even if you just like randomly haphazardly put them there, because that's how you stay valid in your application. Then from October to January, that's when the AFP interviews are going on. But if you're not doing AFP or the PFF psychiatry one, then you're just doing your own thing, studying and carrying on. It's all going on. In December, you'll have your SJT, most likely. So this is based on like last year for us. And then in January to February is when the AFP offers come out. So you can see that it's actually quite early in the timeline when people already know what place they've got and where they'll be if they've done the AFP. In February, though, is the deadline for changing those choices. So those kind of main deanery choices that you'll be picking, or unit of applications that you'll be picking, you can change them from October to February, mix them all around. But in February is that final choice where like your number one place you want to be will be there, and the place you really don't want to end up will be there as well. But don't worry, because I think most people at work end up in that very like top portion of their choices.
So what I would say, speaking as someone quite disorganized myself, be aware that this kind of thing does creep up on you. So I kind of kept on thinking, oh, I've got loads of time. And then I kind of blinked and I didn't, because I was focusing mainly on like the medicine and the studies and doing that kind of thing, that it was only kind of when it was right around the corner that I kind of sawed my pants and said, right, I need to get this done. And it just adds extra stress. So if you kind of set yourself, if you know you're quite disorganized like I am, and you set yourself reminders about a week or two before to make sure it's done by then, that will take a lot of hassle away from you. Currently at the moment, the time window for the SJT is between the 7th and the 19th of December for the coming year. So it should be around the same time ours was, unless everything gets changed last minute from the schedule. And one other thing I'll say is for the October to January, the AFP interviews, if you've not had much experience of interviewing in general, it might be worth considering that even if you're not really interested in AFP, it's a really good opportunity if you were to apply to something like that to get an experience of an interview if you don't have much experience. Because the next opportunity we will have to be interviewed is when we're going for specialty places. So that'll be very high stakes interviews. And if you've never had any sort of medical interviews except for the one to go into Warwick, which is a very different kind of mini interview format, it might be useful as practice and preparation before that to just increase your skill set, even if you're not that interested in going for AFP, which of course you should because it's amazing.
No bias.
Never.
This map you may or may not have seen. This was imprinted in my brain around this time last year, and it's essentially like the positioning of all of the units of application for all of the deaneries of the foundation schools in the foundation programme. And I've taken this time because I want to explain and unpack what all of those words actually mean, because they're jumbled around a lot, and I think they just like to invent new words, possibly to increase confusion, I'm not sure, but it doesn't help. So this is the kind of layout, and as you can see, like for example, Scotland is an entire unit of application, so it's very, very large, but that's almost actually slightly deceptive because you wouldn't necessarily have to be at the most eastern point of Scotland one month and then the most western point of Scotland the next. Whilst the areas are quite large, it's still not like the entire country, and that's what you'd be choosing in part 2. So you'd just be deciding in part 1, would I want to end up in Scotland or not, essentially. So I like to think of it as eggs, because if I can make it simple, then that really helps my brain.
Hi everyone, this is Silver on the Edit here, and essentially I thought that I really like this egg analogy thing, but I don't think I did it justice in explaining it on the day. So I'm here to try again and see if you can get it even better with this one. So, thinking of a normal run-of-the-mill egg from any kind of avian bird you choose, you crack it open and there tends to be a white and a yolk. But if we get really down, like into microscopic level for that yolk, it's made up of particles. Each of those particles combined will make up the yolk. So the individual particles are essentially your individual hospitals, going about their business treating patients. Think about it on a UK scale, they are pretty tiny actually in the grand scheme of things. So they're like the tiny particles in your yolk. Well, combining all of those particles together makes that blob of yellow we call the yolk here, and the yolk is what I'm going to refer to as the trust. So a trust is essentially just a collection of these different hospitals choosing to work together and combining their services to help a particular local region. So, if I use the Coventry and Warwickshire Trusts, for example, they're made up of different individual hospitals, like UHCW, George Eliot Hospital and Warwick, and they all form to help this local region, known as Coventry and Warwickshire. Hopefully with me right now. So then if we look at the egg white, which is looking at the foundation school here, they're actually quite similar to trusts, but not really the same. If you think of the fact that we're looking at the inside of the egg, which is composed of both the yolk and the white, but there are two different components of the inside of the egg, the trust and foundation score are also similar but not quite the same. So a foundation score is looking more from an education and training viewpoint and not a clinical one. So a number of different trusts can combine to form a single foundation school and to handle the training and employment of foundation doctors who are again working in a close geographical location to each other, but usually on a slightly wider scale than what a trust would be looking at. If we take an example like West Midlands South, which did used to be called Coventry and Warwickshire Foundation School, so you can see why sometimes trust and foundation schools can get confused. It also includes Hereford and Worcestershire trusts. This means that the foundation school known as West Midlands South actually spans 7 different hospitals. And if you think of it this way, this one egg white has 2 yolks in it, which you can see happens. So you can have lots of different trusts in one foundation school. This isn't always the case though. Sometimes you might just have one trust in one foundation school, and it really does depend on each one. If we then zoom out a bit more and think all of this is encased in a shell, that shell is the unit of application. And again, it's just the components are all packed together, and it's not based upon education or on clinical training. This is just based upon processing of applications on essentially a purely practical level. So, for instance, Oxford is a relatively smaller region, so it's completely practical for the Foundation School of Oxford to also be its own unit of application, because essentially they can sort out all of their own applications. However, for a larger region, such as West Midlands, there are 3 different foundation schools, so it makes sense for them to either work by themselves to fund the standard foundation programme and each foundation school also be its own unit of application, or in the academic foundation programme where there are less rotations possible for them all to compact together in one West Midlands egg. Egg here clearly referring to unit of application. This is important to note though, because for example, if you were to interview for West Midlands AFP, you would actually be interviewing at the unit of applications interviews. So if you wanted to work in Birmingham, which would be under West Midlands Central, you'd also be interviewing with West Midlands South and West Midlands North people. Which means that if you turn up and there are loads of you, you don't need to be stressed because you're not all going for the same position. The last bit of our diagram refers to our beautiful egg box there, which means our deanery. You'll see on the diagram that there's a does not equal sign on the arrow, and that's just referring to the fact that it's actually a bit of an outdated term. And essentially units of application was supposed to replace the term deanery, but it can still be used sometimes and is actually quite a helpful way to look at units of application sometimes. Because a deanery simply refers to the fact that it's a whole bunch of units of application, following that same pattern as before as a conglomeration of the previous part. So a bunch of unit applications stuck together becomes a deanery. And if you think about it like that, then you'll see that different deaneries are like different sized egg boxes. So the numbers of eggs and the size of those eggs can change depending on your egg box. For example, what used to be called the Oxford Deanery would be an egg box with just one egg in it, because it was just one unit of application, also known as Oxford, which is one foundation school. So I guess that might be one tiny quail egg. Meanwhile, for West Midlands, your egg box would have 3 different eggs in it, because you have 3 different units of application, which refer to 3 different foundation schools, at least for the standard foundation programme. So I guess that's your normal run-of-the-mill chicken egg. And then looking to another extreme, and Scotland, that might be one really big egg box with one giant ostrich egg in it, because it's essentially one deanery with only one unit of application. But inside of that massive ostrich egg, there would be many trusts, so many yolks, swimming around in loads of egg white because there's so many foundation schools within it. But still, no need to worry, because in your second part of choosing your foundation, you can specify much more. So just for now, you'd have a giant ostrich egg in that egg box you're given. So hopefully you can see that whilst deaneries are an outdated term, they do help you to understand the different sizes of the units of application. And that pretty much covers these main vocabulary components in regards to the foundation and the structure of it. However, your job is to create your own special egg box. So I guess in this analogy, you've bought your own egg box from home that's completely empty, and you'll order what eggs you want to put in it and how likely it is that you pick up that egg. You might put your ostrich egg first, and you might put it right at the bottom. It doesn't really matter, as long as it's there somewhere before the deadline. Not only that, but you can also link your egg box with somebody else's. And that means that you can both end up at the same unit of application. But bear in mind what I've said, you're just linking that unit of application. So if you both linked for Oxford, that's a much smaller unit of application, and the chances of you both ending up at the same hospital might be more than if you both linked for Scotland. In Oxford, you may not be even in the same hospital, but you might be only a few miles away from each other. Whilst in Scotland, one of you may be a long way away from the other. But to be honest, that's all ifs and maybes. And if you really want to make sure that you end up close to another person, it's definitely worth linking your handmade special egg boxes, so at least you have a chance at ending up at the same unit of application. That's all from me now. I'll send you back to the video.
So
if you take Scotland, that's a big egg box.
So many different eggs to choose from. So I hope that makes more sense to you anyway, in terms of what these are. And I don't know, if you want an extra explanation of this, just let me know.
Did you say extra?
Oh gosh, pun seriously not intended. Okay. I'll let Dan take this one.
So there is a lot of kind of maligned talk about Oriel as a website. I heard so much bad stuff about it before I even knew what it was. It was kind of this big evil entity to me. But it is the portal where you kind of put in all your job applications. So the screenshot kind of says it all. It's quite primitive. It's not fancy, but it just has all the information there. And unfortunately, there is an awful lot of information, so you can go down real rabbit holes, kind of flicking through every job choice because it outlines every one. So the medical school will put in applications to Oriel for you, and you will be told to set up the account with their permission once you're all doing great. And people have different techniques as to how they go through different areas and how they go kind of deciding through the different roles. I've heard of spreadsheets, I've heard of Word dioramas, but I would definitely say it's useful to kind of write down things if you like them. They do all have codes and things like that on them, because otherwise you will forget and you will lose it and you will never see it again unless you look for another 2 hours. This is also, so all the applications come through this portal. All the interviews you get invited to come through this portal, all the matching, everything about it is all done through this one place. In terms of kind of applications and stuff, you want to save your progress regularly because it does crash because it is a bit antiquated. But other than that, it's kind of fairly self-explanatory and shouldn't give you too much trouble. I don't know if you had any more problems than I did, but I think I was quite blessed in terms of actually using it.
I mean, possibly you're just one of the more technologically apt people, and I'm more inept in certain cases. But even I could mostly manage it. The one thing I would say is that whilst you log in with your email and they have your email, Oriel doesn't always email you about everything that happens on Oriel. So it's good once you've registered and done something to kind of check, even if it's just clicking on it once a day to make sure that an update has happened. Because, for example, I know that someone apparently got an interview, but they were waiting for their email to tell them that they'd gotten the interview. And it wasn't until their friend was like, no, Oriel is saying you've gotten an interview, and the school will email you later about said interview once you accept it. So I always had it as an open tab for the entire time, so I could just click on it every day to make sure that I didn't miss anything. But I think that's the most stressful part of using it, to be honest.
I'd say maybe once every few days just to keep your own stress levels down.
Okay, so we've talked about how you choose where you're going to go, but how do they choose you, which is usually what they're talking about in terms of EPMs and scorings and stuff. And I like to hone in on this because this is why we so much say your decile means nothing, essentially, because it really means almost nothing.
It's nothing at all.
And like, because it's so sad, because people are so sad with their deciles, and it's like, it's irrelevant, and I'll explain why. So your score in terms of where you will rank for your foundation is out of essentially 100. Half of it is from your EPM and half of it is from your SJT. Your EPM is essentially like your educational measure, and that's based in part from your decile. 10th decile means you get 34 points. First decile means you get 43 points. Obviously, we're all intelligent medics, so someone being 10th decile does not mean that they're dumb. It just means that someone might have scored 1 point more than you in an MCQ, and suddenly now you're 10th decile. Which is why everyone knows it's irrelevant, and the scoring seems to also show that. Because you also get points for any additional degrees. So if you're on this course, you immediately have 3 extra points from your degree, because you get 3 points for having a 2-1 degree, essentially, honours, so normal degree, which is essentially boosts your decile up by 3 points. So if you're 10th decile at Warwick,
you're actually 7th decile compared to everybody else who's on a 5-year undergraduate program in the UK.
So that's pretty nice to know. Because so essentially the minimum amount of points you'll have in that area is 37, which is pretty decent. And then also if you're someone super special who has publications, great, you can put them on there as well. But you can only get a maximum of 2 points on that, and they need to be a PubMed ID paper and peer reviewed. So as far from what I could see, it needs to be like a paper of sorts, like a research paper, not just essentially a commentary or an abstract. But I think that's more in a case of what that particular foundation UKFPO chooses on a case-by-case basis. So that's 50 of the points covered. So if you somehow were first decile and had this extra degree and had both publications, you're still going to be at 50. But someone who's a lower decile than you, who has an extra degree and 2 publications or no publication, can still match you. So deciles and everything is basically irrelevant. You're fine. The thing that I think you should probably focus on is your SJT, because that's the big whammy. That's 50 of your points. If you were bottom decile with no degree and no publications, but absolutely smashed your SJT, you could have your pick of anywhere in the UK, essentially. And Warwick people are very, very good at SJT. It might be because we're older. It may just be because everyone is usually quite good with common sense at our medical school. But it works well. And I would say that that's probably what you should most likely try and focus on, as opposed to trying to get a publication in this amount of time. because it's unlikely to happen per se. And your SJT is kind of, as we've gone over before, the points are based on a kind of curve of everyone's points as well. So usually you get around an average of around 40-ish points in a Warwick. So that's a pretty decent score to have with your EPM. So don't stress about anything that's already happened. Just think about doing your best in your SJT and it should work well for you. Also, just to mention, if you do AFP, you just have to pass your SJT, which was a benefit in my mind because I just didn't want to have to stress about the SJT too much. And they don't really care about points. It doesn't add into their scoring. Another thing to mention, though, is make sure your CPT knows who you are. This is for your references. So this isn't part of the actual score. Like, your reference, bad or good, won't dictate whether you get offered the place per se, and that's for really exceptional situations. But it is important going forward, so they're actually part of your pre-employment checks. And if you don't have a good reference, or your CP or your clinical personal tutor writes your reference, because that's who writes our references, and says, I've never met this person before, I've got no idea what they do, your foundation, school, trust, hospital can just deny your employment and say, well, I don't know who you are, I can't do it. So that's another thing, just to make sure that you know your clinical personal tutor and they know you, and that they can do your reference, essentially.
So with this, every time someone said this concept of the SJT absolutely terrified me, because I thought, I've worked, kind of hard for the past few years, and that's only worth 9 points, and I've been sweating blood at times. And then this one exam is literally worth like half of everything. And it kind of makes you kind of think, well, I need to prepare for this like I would prepare for a normal exam. But the thing to note with this is there are 2, if I remember correctly, kind of official resources in the past papers. And the rest of them are like the past medicine ones and the books you can get. These are all ones that people have written that they think are kind of similar to the ones in the exam, as opposed to the official ones. So they do recommend that you kind of be very choosy with the resources you use for it, which kind of limits how much you can actually prepare. So it's something you can get very worked up about and think, I need to do so much. But it's just as important to do less amount of really good quality research with the good quality resources for the SJT itself. And that way it kind of stops you from over focusing on it while still meaning that you can do well. I don't know if you found the same, Silver, but looking at other resources and things like that.
Oh yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think I did like try and do loads of question banks for SJT, and it was just like, no one really knows what the answers are. Just stick with essentially what they give you. You can do extra questions if you really want to, but they're not really necessary.
And also try not to compare yourself to other people too much, because when you kind of get this quantifying thing where you're grading points on everyone, and so I'd be sat in a room of 6 for a teaching session with 2 people who's got PhDs and some people that I know have been published, and there's just me with my good old 2-1, no publications, and it can kind of get you down and things like that. So if you kind of just think, what is the best that I can do? Because that will, in most cases, be good enough, as opposed to looking at everyone else who might have something fancier. Unless you've got a PhD and loads of publications, and then feel free to look around.
Fair play to you. Yeah. Actually, one thing that helped me think in this is because I feel like, for me anyway, it felt inherently wrong for people to be like, just be chill with your SJT, it's fine. When it's so big and important. But if you think of a lot of stuff in medicine, it feels almost inherently wrong. Like if you think a lot of conditions, the better your symptoms, the worse the prognosis. It's inherently backwards. And this is one of those things. So genuinely, the things you put loads of effort in apparently don't matter as much as the stuff that you can just be a little bit more laid back with. I'm not saying never look at a paper, but just, breathe and take it easy, because you've got loads of other exams to deal with between now and becoming a doctor anyway.
Plus, again, the people that we're primarily competing with are younger. And we all know that we get much wiser as we get slightly older. And like if I'd done it as an undergraduate degree and come straight out and had a chance at the SJT, I know I would not have done well as I would have done now. And that's not because I'm a better person, but that's because I know what people want more, and you can answer those questions because you've got that little extra wisdom than someone who's straight out of sixth form, straight into uni, and not really kind of had that experience of life that we have that gives us an advantage. And again, we do better as a statistical thing because of that, I think.
Hi again, Silver from the Edit. Listening back to this, I just want to let you guys know that if you are an undergrad listening to this isn't to say that you're not going to do well in the SJT. This session was specifically for Warwick University students, and so it played more to their strengths. But if you are an undergraduate somewhere else, use your strengths too. You earned your right to be a medic, and you definitely have the common sense to do your best in the SJT. And if you are worried about having a lack of experience, make the most of it and talk to people. Talk to the doctors in the hospitals, older students, nurses, the entire MDT team. Get as much experience as you can from those who've already lived it. And I'm sure trying your best, you'll do amazingly well.
So I think we're coming towards the end of this, really. This document is really good. If you feel like you want more information or you just really like to get your teeth into something official, this is the 2020 Applicants Handbook. They are making a 2021 as well, one that comes out later this year. And this is really helpful. It breaks down everything that we've mentioned into a bit more detail for you. And I know that I read at least some of this, and it was really good at just getting the lay of the land of what is expected of me in terms of this. But really, it's not as much, I think, as your brain might be trying to tell you it is to deal with. It's usually just quite quick things, and it just kind of chugs along by itself, really. And you just get to work out and look forward to something at the end of all of these exams, because I think it's actually kind of supposed to be quite fun to think, where are you going to end up and what exactly are you going to be doing as a proper doctor, which I'm sure you all will become proper foundation year 1 doctors who can treat me when I get old and sickly.
And as it's a 2-year window, and if you think of it in that way, you can kind of think, right, I could possibly go somewhere I wouldn't otherwise go. And I know that I'm there for the minimum of 2 years, and then I could possibly move back if I want. So you can kind of treat it like an adventure, and that makes it quite nice and quite fun. So, like you said, Silver, they are making this handbook now, but the thing that they have published already is the timeline. So the timeline for next year's or this year's applications is already on the internet, and you can kind of view that if you are super organised and want to kind of just have the lay of it now. And that should be correct, unless kind of pandemic changes everything, which I can't see why it would.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it for like the prepared slides. Sorry it's not that long or anything, but also that there isn't that much really to say about it. It's quite a straightforward process. Do you have any questions at all? I think there aren't that many of you, so if you want to just unmute, you can, or type them up.
We got nothing in the chat yet. Oh, hello.
Oh yeah, hi. Thank you both for putting this on. It's quite useful. I'm just wondering about the AFP application. So you know you were talking about the for the EPM and the SJT. Was that just talking about the normal FP program? And was the AFP, did they use those points as well as their own thing, or do they not use that?
So AFP do have a point system, but it differs slightly from the foundation program. And they do value kind of similar things like publication and then experience, and some are very point based, depends on the kind of area that you're applying to. Whereas some of them have something called white space questions, which is kind of fairly open questions that they ask you, and you have to submit what's basically an essay in response to them, just to prove that you can, like, why you think you'd be good at leadership or research, or what your passion is, or what your experience is. And some of them kind of just use those to gauge. So they might have a minimum cutoff, which we should all kind of comfortably pass in our position. But then they kind of filter out people on the answers to those questions, and then the interviews that follow.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good covering of it, really. It's a general overview. There is an AFP session actually tomorrow evening, which should go into a little bit more detail based off of 2 different unit of applications AFP experiences as well. If you wanted a bit more information about it as well.
One thing I will definitely say, because it has to be said, and I don't know what they're saying in that session, is the best advice I could give you for AFP is use your careers officer. So you now have Charlie, who seems really nice. We had Emily Faraz, who is just a goddess, and basically the reason I got into anywhere is because of her. It's like 80% her, 20% me.
Seconded for me.
Yeah. And she was the encouraging bully. So if you get in touch with them, they are so supportive. They will kind of help you craft any questions or answers that you need to give. They will help you prepare for the interview because it's their bread and butter and they know it so well. And I'm hoping they'll say that tomorrow, but in case they don't, speak to them often, become their friends, buy them coffee, whatever it takes. Does that answer the question satisfactorily?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I've
Cool.
got some more, but I'll probably just ask that tomorrow instead then, if this is an AFP specific one.
Yeah, it's up to you. Dan won't be one tomorrow, so.
Okay, well, I might as well ask now then. So I'm just wondering for the AFP application, is it the same kind of process where you select the deanery and then see the options that there are, or is it just free for all?
So, go ahead, Silver.
Okay, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong then in this. Essentially, it's not quite the same. So the AFPs are quite forward thinking and they bring out each of their individual deanery options ahead of time. And then each of those deanery options are actually really rather specific. So within each of those deanery options, you can pick your specific rotation and like rotation choices. This is different between each foundation school. So like, for example, West Midlands had a whole big chart which told you each of the orders of the rotations, but on Oriel you'd have to kind of work out which one they were talking about. Whereas for other units of application, they individually put each of their rotation streams. Because you can only pick 2 though, it is a bit of a free-for-all in the sense that you can pick whichever deaneries you kind of want to, but you can only pick 2. But you can pick as many rotational jobs as you want out of each of those 2 deaneries, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, thanks, it does.
So that Dan has any extra words of wisdom on that point.
So a lot of them, if you go on the kind of foundation school, like they tend to each have their own little website or area, and they will often lay out like the job descriptions almost for the different roles they've got, and they will give you the information about their unit of application or deanery or foundation school, kind of with the most detail. Oriel is quite a, like you kind of alluded to, quite a discombobulating way to look through it and quite a confusing layout. So yeah, you can have your 2 applications and you do that with the foundation one, and then you can have your priority one on top of that if you want. And if you're thinking about applying, if you're on the fence and you're umming and ahhing, I would definitely say put in an application, just because the kind of process of forming an application is really good practice. And then if you've put in an application and you change your mind, you can turn it down. Whereas obviously if you're kind of thinking, I don't know, and you decide not to put in an application, and you think, actually, I wanted to, at that point, you can't change anything because the deadline might have passed.
Yeah, I don't know why, I'm weirdly desperate for like loads of people in your year to go for AFP if they want to, just because I feel like there's this weird vibe from your year that like you can't do it and people can't make it, and I'm like, mate, you definitely can. If I was able to somehow get my first choice, anybody can and should be able to. So hopefully people will come to tomorrow's session.
Just to offer up Silver to do a lot more work here, but we can power coach you as a pair. We can like motivate you and we can be like, woo! and answer questions and whatnot if you need it. Which
If
I'm
you-
sure you're delighted that I've just volunteered you up for that.
Well, why not? Any other questions at all about anything?
Or if not questions, is anybody worried about anything particularly, like that you want to voice, or to see if it's as bad as you think it might be, or because it's usually not?
I think from what I can see, the chat is currently clear.
I'm glad it's not just me thinking that, because I was worried that people were chatting and it just wasn't showing up on mine.
So that's good then. So if it seems people don't really have questions, which is fine. That's maybe a good thing then. And we explained it super, super well, and you're all going to know exactly what to do for foundation. If you do end up having any other questions at all, feel free to Facebook me or email me. I'm the person. I'm the person who's like just massacring your Jet page at the moment. And Dan, I can send details out for. If
I'm not committing massacre on your Jet page, but I'm on Facebook, and yeah, you feel free to give my details out.
okay.
And if you do want to link deaneries with people, please ask them if they would like to link egg boxes, and don't explain what you mean. Just because that's my favourite thing.
Okay, grand. So yeah, if there are any others, hope you have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for choosing to spend part of your evening with us.
Part
And
of
I
your
hope-
bank holiday weekend.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's probably
quite
bank holiday,
touched.
isn't it? So yeah, and if this message has somehow spurred you to possibly be interested at all at looking at AFP, please be willing to either attend or just catch up on the bank holiday session on AFP. You can just hang around if anyone does have any questions at all at some point.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.